everybody. Welcome to today's webcast. My name is David Terry. I'll be going through the Inventory Manager tool today, talking about discovering SQL servers and helping you understand licensing around the SQL servers that you have. Before we get too far into this, I'm the only one from IDERA on this call, so I don't get any feedback internally if my audio and video is working. So I'm going to share my screen out, and hopefully you guys will be able to see that as well as hear me. And if one of you don't mind, there's a question answer section in GoToWebinar that you can kind of type questions to me. If one of you could let me know that you can see and hear me okay, that would be great. Thank you. Also, obviously, if you guys can if you do have questions, you can always type into GoToWebinar, and I'll check those from time to time and answer them as we go. So I appreciate everybody taking their time today to sit down with us for a little bit and look at the Inventory Manager tool. It's a great product. It's one of the tools I really enjoy showing people because it does a lot as far as giving you a lot of information about your SQL Server enterprise, right? Not only is it good for licensing, which we'll talk about in this call, but really just giving you a really good overview of how your SQL servers are set up, giving you general information about how they're behaving, and it even has some high-level alerting, right? So not every SQL server needs a hardcore performance monitoring tool, but pretty much every SQL server needs to have some alerting to know if they're up or down, if backups are being done, disks are running out of space, and Inventory Manager can cover that for you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in PowerPoint. I really prefer to spend more of my time within the actual application itself, but the general idea of this product is kind of twofold, right? If you already know the SQL servers that you have, maybe you have your smaller shop, you have 5 to 20 SQL servers, you know exactly where they are, you know what they're called. You can just manually add SQL servers into this tool. But one of the really nice features is this discovery functionality. I think a lot of people have used the Microsoft tool that will scan your environment looking for SQL servers. And this tool does something similar. It has different methods for scanning, but the goal is to find SQL servers, and you can schedule this to run on an ongoing basis, find SQL servers that you don't know about, have them automatically added to the product, and have data gathered against them without you having to take any intervention at all, right? So it can help you really understand sprawl, that express instance that's sitting on the, the HR's desktop that you don't know about. Well, maybe you need to know about that one, right? So it can find those SQL servers, and once they're found, you can really organize them into a lot of different aspects, right? You can build tags around these SQL servers to help, is it development, is it production, is it on-prem, is it off-prem, those sorts of things, and use that to organize data sets that you're exporting from the tool or just visualizing within the tool. But you can assign owners, you can define locations. There's all kinds of nice metadata that you can assign to these instances so that it's much better organized. Once we do our discovery, we're finding out a lot about the SQL servers. What databases are there? How big are they? Where they're located? But also we're looking at hardware aspects of CPU, and that gives you core counts, which are really important for Microsoft TrueUps. And then there's really good reporting via SSRS that you can pull out of this product. So it's a pretty simple tool. As far as architecture goes, it's agentless. You don't have to install anything on the SQL servers themselves that are being monitored. Basically, good job. Sorry, I was checking the questions. So basically what you're going to do is you'll have a central server, virtual machine or something like that somewhere. This doesn't have to be dedicated. You can have it living along with other tools, either IDERA tools or other tools that you have in your organization. But that central server will be kind of the source of all this data collection and system scanning, right, looking for the SQL servers. Once we gather all that information from our, what we call the SQL Inventory Manager Collection Service, it is then stored in a database. Now that database could reside on the same box as that collection service, or you could have it on a completely different SQL Server instance somewhere else. It's not going to be a giant database. It'll be probably about a gig per instance per year, and that's aggressive, right? So it may be less than that, but the idea is that you don't need a ton of space for the inventory manager repository. Now, this is a web-based solution. It lives in what we call the IDERA dashboard. This was the very first tool that was developed for the dashboard, and frankly, it's all web-based. So it lives within the IDERA dashboard. If you're not familiar with the IDERA dashboard or don't have one already, when you do the initial install, it will create it for you. But the IDERA dashboard is a common web framework that really houses all the web consoles for the different IDERA tools. So inventory manager, SQL Safe, enterprise job manager, diagnostic manager, etc. They can all live in the same dashboard. So if you don't have a dashboard, there will be a second, or it's actually a primary install in this case, and then the inventory manager plugs into it. Now the dashboard has its own services as a web service and a REST service, and then it has its own repository as well. But those again are also very small repositories, so you don't need to worry too much about that as far as space goes. And let me kind of show you what I mean by this, because it can be confusing for newer people. So when I talk about IDERA dashboard, and it's a web-based console, right? So the IDERA dashboard is a common web framework, and this is just a bunch of different widgets that I have in here from different tools, right? SQL Safe, Enterprise Job Manager. There's probably Inventory Manager right here, right? Diagnostic Manager, Compliance Manager. All this information from different IDERA tools being displayed in one dashboard. This is completely customizable. But the idea is that if you drop down on the applications list, as you can see in here, I have many different IDERA tools all living in the same web console. So my authentication, when I'm using my domain credentials to get in here, I have access to all these different tools. Now, that is controllable under the administration of the dashboard itself. You can manage users, meaning that some people in the org may need to have access to just one product. Like Deanna can only see SQL Diagnostic Manager. When I go look at David, I can't edit myself. Let's look at SQL Tools, right? He has access to different things. So you can control who has access to Inventory Manager. Maybe you don't want the whole world to see it, but you have certain users who do. And then once you're ready for Inventory Manager, you just drop down and pick it from the list, right? So that's what we mean by the dashboard. If you don't have a dashboard for Inventory Manager to live in, you'll need to install that first, but it's all part of the same installer. You don't really have to do much. It does it for you. So let's talk about how Inventory Manager works, right? Once the tool's up and running and you're working with it and everything's set up the way you like it, probably you'll start here on this home screen and go from there. But if you are brand new and you don't have any data in here, we need to add some servers. Now, how do we do that? Under administration, there's a couple different methods that you have to add instances. And the first things we'll talk about is manual, right? So if you already have a big giant list of SQL servers and it's in a spreadsheet and that's what you've been using to control inventory for a long time, you may want to edit that up a little bit. And when I say edit it, if you clicked on that little link inside that wizard, it'll show you the format that we're looking for. So you can basically take a spreadsheet with all of your information related to the SQL servers that you know about, and import them, right? So you can import on-prem, Amazon, and Azure, and there's different formats for each type. Now, the other method, if you want, you can just manually add instances. So yeah, we just built this new server. Let's just go ahead and add it. On-prem, quote-unquote, private, Amazon or Azure. And when you hit browse, it'll go look, right? So what SQL servers do we have? Pretty simple, right? Dev4, it wants to add Dev4, right? But ultimately, I think what a lot of people are using this tool for is to help understand SQL servers that they don't know about. And generally what you're going to do there is use our discovery functionality. Now, there is a set of credentials that you can add in here because you may need different credentials to talk to different SQL servers. So you can go ahead and add all the different credentials. You know, we have a UAT credential, we have a production credential, we have a dev credential. You can add those in, and that makes it a lot easier when you set up your Discovery Center options to manage different credentials per server. Now, the other reality of this situation is you may have completely separate domains, right? So you might have non-trusted domains that you need to worry about. And in the addition of those domains, or on the left-hand side, IP ranges that you want us to scan, you can specify different credentials for different locations. Now, how often is this going to happen? In my case, it runs every morning at 1 a.m., right? So every morning at 1 a.m., there's a scan that kicks off. And my scans are looking at certain IP ranges and certain domains to try to identify SQL servers that exist. When you add one of these, and let's pretend you're a brand new user, right? You've never used this product before, you just downloaded it and installed it. I would probably recommend that you initially put in a smaller subset of IPs, right? So put in 10, 15 IP addresses that you know SQL servers live in, and just do a quick run there, right? Instead of looking at the entire enterprise, because your credentials might not work. Maybe the settings that you have listed below aren't going to work exactly for every SQL server, and you're wasting scanning time. So let's go ahead and do some testing against locations where we know SQL servers exist and see how it behaves. And part of what I mean by see how it behaves is I want to see which one of these probes down below, or which one of these tests down below, are going to work, so that I can really focus on what we know works and ignore the things that don't work. Now, when you add one of these guys, and let me edit this and show you what I mean. So when you put in this IP range, the only thing it really needs to know from you is what account do you want to leverage to do the scanning. And I generally, if it's in the same domain as my inventory manager install, I'm going to use the account that's running the collection service. Now, obviously, I may need to use a different account, right, and specify a different user account, or that multiple account option is where I'm reading from that list that I talked about first. So when I input all those different credentials, it'll use that list to do its testing. So it'll go for the first account you have, the second account, the third account, etc. So you can get pretty direct on which accounts are going to scan different areas, and I'm doing that through IP range. The same thing for domain. So the ATXDC domain is where inventory manager is installed. That's basically in Austin, where I am today. Syspros is down in Houston, right? So that's a completely separate domain. I'm using a different account to do the scanning down there. And then down below, we'll look at the different methods that we can use for scanning. So that MAPS tool that Microsoft offers is really generally using WMI scanning, and we'll do the same thing. So if MAPS works for you, the WMI settings and inventory manager will probably work great for you as well. But you can use things like resolution service, service control manager, Windows registry, and TCP. Now, by default, the default ports are in here from SQL Server, but if you're running on non-standard ports, you can go ahead and comma separate, throw in the port numbers you want us to look at. We'll look there. An option that you have is to discover BI services along with the SQL Server instances. And what we're talking about really is, hey, SSRS, SSAS, SSIS, we need a list of all our report servers, right? So by toggling this little checkbox right here, you're going to get some of that information back. Here's a list of all your analysis services boxes. Here's a list of all your reporting services boxes. And then at the very bottom, this is kind of to help clean up the data a little bit. So first off, you may need to use fully qualified domain names. There's a good little help tip right here that you can look at. But, if you do, check the box. Really, it's not going to hurt you in any way to check it. So I think most people do. And then at the very bottom, discovered instance options. The idea there is that you may find some false positives. A good example would be a traditional failover cluster. Let's say I have an active passive 2-node failover cluster. Well, both of those servers are going to have the binaries, the registry keys, the WMI counters. They're going to have a lot of information because there's really 2 distinct instances there. But what we're going to try to monitor is the virtual instance. So only show instances where version can be validated, only show instances that have been discovered by at least 2 methods, and only show instances that I'm able to log into. The idea there is that it can help get rid of some of that false positives that happen when you're scanning environments with availability groups and clusters, and maybe even decommissioned SQL Server instances. So there may be some artifacts related to SQL Server left on that box, even though that SQL Server has been decommissioned. So by checking those boxes, it'll kind of clean up your scan a little bit and give you less false positives. There's another method for scanning, which is just old school browser and ODC scanning, and that does work for a lot of SQL servers, but not always. If you know you don't have browser enabled, that's not going to work for you. So you probably toggle this thing off, right? And the same kind of thing applies down below, that you can put some fail-safe stuff in there as well. Now, private network is what we've been looking at. There's also cloud-based, and I don't have Amazon set up. I do have Azure set up, but I don't want to show that to you because there's a lot of private keys and things in there. But just keep in mind that if you are a Azure shop or an AWS shop that has a lot of SQL out there that you need to find, we do have methods that you can add that into the tool and do scanning as well. So there is some flexibility there to do both on-prem and cloud-based scanning. And as I talked about earlier, a smaller IP range. The reason why I want to do a smaller IP range initially is really to see what's going to be successful in these scans. And the way to kind of look at that, after the scan is done, and let me show you one other thing real fast. What I recommend, and I think most people are going to do, is use auto registration after the scan. So what this is talking about is after we discover SQL Server instances, if this is checked, it will automatically be moved into the section of the tool where we start gathering performance data on it, or performance and inventory data, et cetera, right? And you can exclude certain types, right? So maybe we don't care about Express. We don't want to spend a SIM license on Express servers. Don't auto-register that one, but everything else do. And the reason why I bring that up is that if you don't have auto-registration enabled and you hit this instance list, you're not going to see any instances. You're going to have to drop down here and go to discovered instances, which I don't have any discovered because everything I discovered gets automatically registered, right? So normally turn that on, especially in a trial, because a trial is unlimited licensing. So just let it go. In this list of SQL servers, there's a discovered method over here. I'm going to change this over to a PDF real fast. So this is going to kick open a PDF of what we found, right? So every kind of view that you see in this tool can be exported like I'm doing now. And what I'm really looking at is this discovered method column. So what this is showing me is what worked. How did we find this SQL server? Well, these SQL servers are found a bunch of different ways. So, it looks like to me, I could probably turn off some of these scans and just stick with maybe WMI or service control, whichever one I really want to use. It looks like I'm getting pretty good results. So you have some options there. I think what I would turn off is what's not showing up in this list, right? If we know this doesn't work, it's never worked, let's not do it anymore, right? So that's kind of the idea around doing a smaller data set or a smaller list of smaller list of SQL servers so you can see what works and kind of manage it a little bit more there. 1 second. There is a question about port numbers. So the port number scanning is something that you can control, right? So out of the box, the only 2 ports that are listed are the native SQL Server ports, but you can put any kind of port that you guys are leveraging for SQL to scan in that area. Now, once you get the servers added, right, there's some things that you can do with them as far as organizing together. You saw earlier there's a tag list up there. So you can multi-select, for example, and say edit credentials, right, and change which credentials. So maybe we found the server, but you're not getting all the data back that you're looking for. You may need to change your credential that has more permissions, right? You can come in here and modify that. And there's 2 different sets of credentials for an on-prem server. There's a SQL Server credential and a OS level credential for WMI information. So you can modify globally, right? You can multi-select and modify. You also may want to edit things. So if you look at instance properties, right, who owns it? So, you can type in freeform, and then once you've done that, it'll save it to a drop-down. Who owns it, where's it located, you can put additional comments around it, which accounts are you going to leverage. You can tag them. And what we mean by tagging is these are non-exclusive, right? So if you notice on this server, it's Austin, Dev1, and then it's development, and it's non-critical. And if the tags that you're looking for aren't in the default list, you can type in and create a new tag, right? So you can build these tags, logical grouping of instances also. And then once you've started to do those things, owner, location, version, addition, minor version, that kind of stuff is now something that I can filter by. So we now have a bunch of instances in here. We know what versions, additions, database count, size, owners, locations. But if I'm interested more in licensing, I'll probably drop down to a licensing view. And this is manual. There's a report I can run as well. But now I'm looking at core factor table, something that you can edit as well, so you can check for updates and modify this. But the idea is that I now know, how many sockets, how many logical processors, number of cores, what the core factor will be around there, possible licenses. Are they physical? Are they virtual machines? Last time it was modified. And then unfortunately, Microsoft, there's not a SQL query I can run against a SQL server to say if it's licensed, right? That's just not something that's available. So it would be something that you would have to tell us. So I know that these guys are licensed. So you can check and toggle that once you know, hey, we have a license for this guy, we have a license for that guy. You can indicate within the tool so that everybody else can see that we've already accounted for this guy. But the idea is that you now have this nice breakdown, and you can filter by edition and version and all that kind of stuff before you export, but you can export this out and share it with your team or share it with Microsoft, et cetera, and give you more insight into, or give them more insight into what your estate looks like and how that's going to be handled from a licensing perspective. So license views can be seen this way. You also can look at things like BI services, as I mentioned earlier. Maybe we only care about SSRS right now. Show me all my report servers, right? Where are they? Are they running? Are they stopped? What version? What edition? You can also look at things like patching. And patching it's not going to patch for you, but it'll say, hey, listen, there are updates available. These are the updates. You can click this link. It'll give you the download for that specific patch that needs to run on that specific server. And then, let's see what else. Discovered decommissioned instances, right? This is, so once you decommission a SQL server, you drop the license on it, right? Drop the license from an inventory manager perspective. So if you still wanted to have some history around your old SQL servers, so when was that decommissioned? When was the last time we used it? That kind of stuff. How many DBs were on it? You have a list of decommissioned servers. And then we also mentioned earlier discovered, right? So discovered instances, you may have a list of SQL servers in there that have been identified but not moved into the monitoring phase. So the instance view, I think it's kind of higher level. It's not necessarily where I spend most of my time within the product, but this is where you can go and organize things, get some more attributes, metadata associated to these servers so that they're easier to kind of drill through, maybe on the Explorer view or even on the home view. But again, as I mentioned earlier on, when I first open up the tool, this is exactly what I want to see, right? So I get on demos all the time for different products and say, well, how many SQL servers do you have? And people say, well, we think we have around, 20. We think we have about 300. Nobody really knows. Well, when I come into this view, I can say, well, I have 7. Or actually 9. Let me rephrase that. I have 9 SQL servers. 8 are private. One's an Azure box. I have those across 7 servers. I have 118 databases. My total data size is around 154 gigs, and my total log size for the enterprise as a whole is 52 gigs, right? So the idea is that on this main screen, what we're looking at right now, because I've not filtered down to an individual instance, is just high level across the board. And there are some alerts that are available across the enterprise for you as well. And as you can see up here at the top, they're ranked in different levels. Level 1, which is minor, level 2, kind of medium, level 3, which is high. And what these alerts are really all about are it's not trying to be a performance monitoring tool, right? It's not going to tell you that your page load expectancy is low or that this query is running long. But what it will tell you is things like this, right? The E drive. So on one of my SQL servers on prod 1, the E drive is at 98% capacity. There are 31 databases that have not been checked with the CheckDB, right? So CheckDBs have not been done on these servers. Excuse me. 8 databases have not been checked recently. 11 databases don't have a current backup. Show more recommendations. There's even more in here, right? So the idea is based on the fact that not every SQL server needs a hardcore monitoring tool, but again, most SQL servers need some monitoring. And in the administration pages where you can configure thresholds around alerting, but data file, log file, twofold, right? Databases don't have current backups. Consistency checks aren't being done, so CheckDBs aren't being done, haven't been recently. Databases don't have a backup period. Databases have auto shrink enabled, probably not a good idea, at least not in production. Databases are unusable state, so they're offline, not optimized for ad hoc workloads. The SQL Server instance is not there. The response time of the server is very slow. TempDB files aren't the same size. We can't monitor certain things, disk getting full, XP command shells enabled, right? So it's not a huge list of alerting. Diagnostimeter, for example, which is our performance monitoring tool, there's about 105 different unique metrics. There's about 15 in here. But it's a really, I think inventory manager is good for all servers. Diagnostimeter is good for the important ones, right? So that's the way I look at it. But having some health checks, having an email sent out to you when your disks are getting full or the server's down, this will do it for every instance in the box. And then down below, you have some big picture, what are the biggest databases enterprise-wide. If you really wanted a full list, you can expand that out, right? And then, which ones are the most active. And then down below here, just some big picture information about the instances that have been added. But you can drill in, right? So maybe that's great, but we want to look at prod 1. That's where the E drive's getting full. All right, so these are the alerts that we're seeing specifically for this one server. These are the applications that we've identified that are interacting with this SQL Server instance. And one thing about the application view, this is an old SharePoint farm. And when I first saw the application listed, it was .NET SQL Client Data Provider, which is pretty generic. That could be anything. So what I did was I added SP 2013. It's an old 2013 farm, right? So I put that in there to indicate a little bit more internal information about what that is, right? And then more importantly, the biggest databases on this server, the most active databases on this server, and then general database information below. So once you get kind of down to the instance level, these instance summaries change. So instead of looking at the enterprise summary, I'm now looking at an instance. What logins are out there, right? Are there patches available? Yes, these are some downloads for that server. Which edition, is it, so this is going to pull up information about that. Where'd you go? Sorry. Licensing comments, right? So this is going to give me information about the SQL Server, how many sockets, how many processors, how many cores, what the core factor is, and then comments that I can indicate below, right? So again, we're trying to give you really good information about this box at a high level. And one of the nice things that this tool can also offer is search. So if I'm looking for, my name is David Terry. If I search for Terry, it's going to come back and says, well, there's some databases that have the word Terry in them, and there's also 2 decommissioned servers, instances, I should say, that had the word Terry and then David Terry L laptop, right? So there's also search that you can use to find things. So if someone calls up and says, hey, this database is giving us trouble, well, that's nice, but I don't have a clue where that database is. You can search for it, and it'll tell you where it is. So search is also nice. One thing that we haven't gotten into, and let me show you one other little thing, sorry. There's a lot that this tool can do, and it's pretty obvious once you kind of get in that blue things you can click on. So once you click on a database, for example, you get, where the file's located. You can tag individual databases so you can organize by that. You can add comments in here as well. But one thing I wanted to mention, all this kind of gibberish in here, this is stuff that I've done on demos over time. I should probably clean it up a little bit. But there's even more advanced metadata that you can assign to the database, to the instance, to the server, and we call those custom inventory tags. Let me look real fast. All right. I was looking at the questions. So let me talk about custom inventory fields real quick, and then we'll get into Explorer and reporting. So custom inventory fields, there's attributes and different types of metadata, I guess, that you want to assign to your servers that maybe we don't necessarily have a solution for, right? It's something more customizable than just a tag. So you can go into administration, say manage custom inventory. When you say add here, you can name it whatever you want. So webcast will be the name of this one. And then what type, what are we trying to describe? Are we trying to describe the server itself? Are we trying to describe the SQL Server instance? Or are we trying to describe the database, right? So maybe this will be a database specific attribute. Actually, let's go with instance. And then open-ended means that you can just type whatever you want free form, but you can tie it down a lot more. It could be a yes, no, right? So is it licensed or not? Maybe I change this to licensed or not licensed, or maybe I say, is this on-prem or cloud? Yes or no, maybe that doesn't work as well, but you can do a pick list. So you could say, on-prem, Azure, Amazon. Whatever lines you have in there will be in the drop down when you assign that. So you can build some much more tailored or finely controlled metadata that you can assign to, again, the instance, the database, or the server. And the reason why I bring that up is before we go into the Explorer view, it's one of the things that you can filter by. So right now I don't have any server inventory fields, but I do have database inventory fields and I have instance inventory fields. So if I go into the instance inventory fields, maybe patch date is what I want to look at, right? So this is going to show me instances broken down by which patches or the date that I have patched, or location, right? So I can say DC, data center 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's more ways that you can use that to filter down, but what are we looking at? Right now, this is pretty basic. I'm looking at instance count by owner. So I have 3 different owners. SE team owns 6, SharePoint team owns 2, and the SysProd team owns 1, right? But maybe what I want to do is something more broad. So I want to look at data size by owner. Well, that's nice, but maybe I want to look at database size by database. So this is going to list out every single database in the environment from the biggest to the smallest, and then I can export that out to some format and feed it to an end user, right? And there's lots of other tags that you can apply in here, or location, owner, all kinds of different ways that you can kind of organize this together. So when you export out, you're going to show them exactly what they want to see. So again, this is one of the ways you can get data out of the tool. But there's also 4 reports, or I think maybe 5. Let me come back and look. 5. So there's also a report pack that comes included with Inventory Manager. So in the Inventory Manager folder, I'll show you this too, since we're here, why not? So the machine that's running Inventory Manager, IDERA Inventory Manager, there is a report utility. So the reports themselves, RDL files are right there, but there is a utility that will export those RDL files to your report server and create the data source for you. So generally that's what you're going to do, but the root RDLs are in that folder as well. But the goal is really to give you some automated report facilities using subscriptions in SSRS, right? So a chargeback report, as an example, is just really a big picture, high level report. I'm looking at all servers, all editions, all versions. I have 2014, I have to, blah, blah, blah. Most of my servers are 2017. And then down below, we see each individual instance, and then I can extend out the box next to the instance name and then get down to the databases. So this is a really kind of broken down, detailed custom report around a customizable report around the entire enterprise. We call it a chargeback report because it's helping you. For example, I can break this down by a group, right? SC Lab, we have to bill them for their data storage and blah, blah, blah. So this will give you a way to do that broken down by group or tag or however you want to do it. And there's a sub report as well, which is going to be just the same report, but only looking at one instance in its databases. Health check reports, looking at the different alerts that have been generated. Inventory manager reports themselves, again, more flexible as far as what you can filter on. So maybe you only want to see decommissioned servers. Can you give me a list of all the decommissioned servers over the last scan? Here you go. And then lastly would be that licensing report, as I mentioned. So this is probably what I'm going to send out to my management team / Microsoft rep, etc., to help better visualize and understand where we need to go as far as core counts and licensing. Are we licensed or not? Is it virtual? Is it physical? Do you have any custom inventory fields associated to them? So, patch date and all that kind of stuff can also be included in here. And then the last time hardware changed. So it's a pretty powerful tool, to be honest. It's not one of those tools that's just like a maps tool that's scanning and saying, hey, here are your servers and this is the versions. What I'm really looking at this tool is a complete overview, detailed understanding of what my enterprise looks like. With that, obviously I'm more than happy to take questions that you guys have. If you have them, please go ahead and type them in. So Express, so one of the questions is, how are Express instances identified and / excluded? So when we look back at the Discovery Center options, it's not necessarily going to not discover Express, right? So I guess it depends on what you're looking for. If you want to find Express, it's going to find them no matter what, right? So it'll start scanning and looking, and if it sees Express is there, it sees Express is there. So it'll log in and it'll say, what version, what edition of Sql Server are you? And it will come back and identify that as Express. In the auto registration feature, you can say exclude Express, meaning that even though we find Express servers, we're not going to move that into the monitoring phase where we would extend a license. Now, licensing for this product, if you're familiar with IDERA's licensing, generally it's instance-based. And the reason why I'm bringing this up in the Express question is you may not want to spend licensing on Express with Inventory Manager. The licensing for Inventory Manager is still instance-based, but it's not locked into a certain hard number. What I mean by that is you might buy 32 licenses of Diagnostic Manager and 22 licenses of Compliance Manager. With Inventory Manager, we sell like a 10-pack, a 30-pack, or maybe it's 50. I don't know the breakdowns, but 10, 50, 100, 200, and then unlimited licensing. So we give you a range because we know the idea here is that you might find a new server. Every week you might find a new server. Well, I'd hate for you to have to call up and say, hey, we need a new license for this new instance that we just found. We give you some headroom so that you can grow. But as far as how do we identify Express, we identify it by querying the server once we've identified it, and then you can exclude it if you need to. We don't have an Oracle tool, Wayne. I'm sorry. This is only, at least right now, working for Microsoft SQL Server. That's not to say that we've toyed with and thought about. I think we're probably closer to the MySQL side to include in here. Not necessarily for the licensing piece, but just the inventory piece. But Wayne, I'll take that comment or that question back to the product management team and at least put a check mark next to the we want this for Oracle too. So we have a existing user, and Prashant, I think what I'll do after the call, get in touch with you, and we can maybe set up something where we can get that looked at. So Prashant's having some CPU pressure from Inventory Manager, which is very unusual because this is a lightweight tool. But yeah, Prashant, we'll get in contact with you and see if we can't figure out what's going on there. Interesting. So Joe, looks like you got your audio worked out. JB, hopefully I answered your questions the way you needed them. Everybody else, we appreciate it. So just the way these webcasts work, obviously, maybe not everybody got to see this. You may have internal people in your organization that want to see this as well. You might want to share this with someone who wasn't able to make it. After the call's over, we generally will, within the day or so, get you a download link for the video and the audio section of the tool so that you can share this out. And we do very much appreciate everybody's time today. Hopefully this was valuable for you. You know, Inventory Manager is a great little tool, really simple to get up and running. I really enjoy it. Thank you, everybody. Now, let me show you. We have a little bit of time left. I'll show you where you get it. So if you don't have this product and you're interested in working with it, products, normally I'll just click in here. We do have a lot of tools, you know, not just for SQL Server. We do have Oracle tools as well. Unfortunately, this is one of them that is just for SQL. But monitor database performance, under there you'll find Inventory Manager. Just say start for free. It will basically ask for a little form to fill out, and then it will give you a download link. The trial's good for 2 weeks, and it's unlimited instances, so it can go find 2,000 servers if that's what you want it to do, and monitor all of them with the trial. And again, from a pricing standpoint, and if you, I don't know if we have the breakdowns in here, our pricing. Well, that's Inventory Manager. Sorry, I don't normally, they don't like me talking about money. The idea is that I'm more of an engineer than anything. So if you download the tool, we'll get in contact with you. But again, the general concept is we have tiers, right? It's not a 13 license product. It's a 20 pack or a 40 pack or a 100 pack, and it goes up to unlimited. So eventually you'll hit a point where, you know, unlimited makes the most sense. But the idea is out on our website, you can download it, get a trial. Once you do that, you'll get in contact, or one of our guys will get in contact with you, and you can ask them as many questions as you want. You can set up an in-person one-on-one demo, not in person, but you know, a demo similar to this, but directly one-on-one with you or your organization, so you can ask more specific questions directly. Thanks, guys. You guys have a good day.